Hello, everyone, and welcome to another author talk at the Mancos Public Library. Since COVID, we're doing this via Zoom and learning new things. This morning, I'm delighted to have with us Gene Stevenson, who is the author of Canyon Country, Exploration and River Lore. He really has 4 decades, that's 40 years of experience as a river runner. And it includes the Grand Canyon, Cataract Canyon, and the San Juan River. He has 25 years working for Wild River Expeditions as a river guide, and he's a consummate storyteller. He has over 45 peer-reviewed geological papers. The man is also a geologist, and he has a degree in a bachelor's degree in geology from Fort Lewis, excuse me, and a master's degree from Northern Arizona University, also in geology and science. He, excuse me, the book that he has written talks about the remarkable and resilient life of Kenny Ross. So Gene, hello and welcome. And I think you're prepared to read a little bit from this amazing book that you have put together.
Yes, I am. Would you like some passages from it?
Yes, please.
Okay. Well, I thought I would mix some things around here. One was just that it's from the doesn't really matter which chapter, you have to get the book, find what I'm reading, I suppose. Kenny Ross was, just a little preface here, as far as famous river runners of the Colorado River system, John Wesley Powell, of course, is everyone has heard about John Wesley Powell. And when river running became popular, in the 20th century, it was still just adventurers that were doing it, mostly in wooden boats. But after World War II, with the advent of military surplus inflatable boats, it really kicked off as to being more of a sport, and where you could take passengers along. And there's a number of people that have been recognized over the years that started various companies. But Kenny was always kind of left behind. He ran mostly the San Juan River, and the San Juan is kind of a second sister to the main Colorado River system. So you hear lots of things about running, Grand Canyon and through Cataract and Glen Canyon, and not so much about the San Juan. But anyway, Kenny worked his way around to doing it, and had quite the adventurous life before he got into river running commercially. But I thought I'd give you first just an overview of who Kenny was. And this is titled "Smoke 'Em If You Got 'Em." No one knew exactly when Kenny started smoking cigarettes, maybe as early as his cowboy days, when he learned to twist one up from a bag of Bull Durham with knee bent over the saddle horn, or possibly at Mesa Verde, as Jess Nussbaum and other park employees were big smokers too. Smoking was hard to avoid in the 30s and 40s. Just watch a Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall movie to see what a trendsetter smoking had become. The first seen photos of Kenny with cigarette in hand are in many of the Mesa Verde photos, and in almost every photo of it to his dying day. It is hard to find a picture of Kenny without the darn cigarette in hand or not. Kenny was a man of medium build, weight in at 152 pounds, and stood 5'9" tall. His sons and numerous personal witnesses knew that in his later years, his favorite brand of cigarettes was either Carlton's or Pall Malls, and his favorite beers was either Hamm's or Lucky Robin. As documented by all his letters from 1934 to the early 1980s, Kenny was a prolific communicator by way of the typewriter, an Underwood manual version to be specific. Kenny was a competent typist and his communication efforts are duly recorded by the hundreds of documents he saved as onion skin carbon copies. He took his new job as camp manager quite seriously and composed individual letters to each and every boy who was ever involved in the explorers camp from 1947 forward. Many of his letters are 2 to 3 pages long and single-spaced with only minor errors and corrections. So to back up a little bit, Kenny actually started out working with the CCC in 1933 and 1934. Was part of the Rainbow Bridge Monument Valley expedition that went down the Colorado and the San Juan River, and to document the various ruins and stuff, because there was an attempt at that time to, or at least a consideration, to make most of northeastern Arizona and southwestern Utah into a national park. And then they finally realized that, oh, there were actually a number of Native American people that lived there that stopped the national park movement at that point. But anyway, Kenny ended up applying for and getting hired at Mesa Verde National Park in 1934 and worked his way up to being a park ranger. And I'd like to read a section here about the dioramas that are so popular to this day at Mesa Verde. And this is entitled Museum Dioramas. Kenny's first duties as a new enrollee were maintenance, guiding, and public contact, as well as work as museum dioramas. As early as 1915, the park had a museum of sorts with poorly displayed exhibits in a small log cabin. Jess Nussbaum had enlisted the interest of Mrs. Stella Levinston of San Francisco in providing funds for a start of the museum. John D. Rockefeller Jr., a visitor in 1924, supplied the money needed to complete it. But the addition of these types of exhibits, dioramas, was just being introduced into the museum. Nussbaum brought in Paul Franke in 1931 to be in charge of the museum and educational activities, and it was Franke who saw Kenny's interest in building the displays. Dioramas originated in 1823 as a type of picture viewing device where the Frenchman Louis-Jacques Mandé Daguerre was considered the inventor. In addition, Daguerre was a decorator, manufacturer of mirrors, painters, and panoramas, and designer and painter of theatrical stage illusions. He would, to pass along to. The dioramas at Mesa Verde were three-dimensional miniature models of cliff dwellings or surface sites designed to depict small-scale replicas of Puebloan scenes, complete with miniature Puebloan men, women, and children going about their daily duties. The entire scene was built to a scale of 1/2 inch to 1 foot. The dioramas also include pots, oyas, baskets, etc., complete with miniature fires and burned in fire pits. The dioramas were enclosed in glass showcases at the Chapin Mesa Archaeology Museum at the park headquarters and have remained a popular exhibit to this day. Kenny Ross built several dioramas, completing Step House Cave with the help of Meredith Gillette and White Dog Cave in 1935. Spruce Tree House was completed in May 1938. Construction of White Dog was begun by Lyle Bennett, but completed by Kenny and Meredith. The actual White Dog was completed on the flanks of Comb Ridge near Payette, Arizona, and has some inscriptions from folks who list themselves as Mesa Verde and maybe Kidder and Guernsey, or more likely folks that were gathering information for the diorama. The other dioramas were depictions of archaeological sites within Mesa Verde National Park. Alfred Lee Roll, shown in the Mesa Verde historical photo from Mesa Verde website, worked through the WPA program and was an artist who painted all the backdrops for the dioramas. According to Don Ross, and that's Kenny Ross's son, Alfred made the molds for all the little bitty wee people that Kenny painstakingly painted. Furthermore, Kenny made all the miniature ceramics and baskets with equal meticulous care. And that's an important part of Kenny's life, because Mesa Verde is still, his dioramas are still on display at Mesa Verde. So
It's nice to
really
have a
special
little
place.
bit of the history. I think many of us have been up there and not really known about how they came to be. Yeah.
Absolutely, they're incredible detail, and there's a lot of side stories as to, that I have as to how they were built, and they would basically uh, sit around in the morning, drink a cup of coffee, and decide what are we going to make today, and go from there with their little, and if you've been there, they're all very small, incredibly detailed figures, and the pots and everything are basically just incredible, intricate work. And I'm really glad that the dioramas have weathered the storm as technologies come along with all the other things that are in museums now. So with that, I can continue, or I can move on to some other passages. There's
Well,
one particular, go ahead.
I'd like to ask you a few questions
Oh,
about the
sure.
author, and then maybe we can go back to that if we have time.
Okay, sounds great.
So, Gene, tell us, where did you grow up?
Well, I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Aha. And what was your childhood like there?
Well, it was Albuquerque was not a very big city. We had I started third grade in Albuquerque, but I was born in Southeast Missouri, and we moved back and forth for various reasons from Missouri to Arizona, to Miami, Arizona, near Globe, and my dad had been a farmer in Missouri, so he had sold the farm, and we'd moved west, and so my dad was a construction worker the rest of his career, and his brother, my uncle, was already in Albuquerque and convinced my dad to move to the boom town of Albuquerque. So that's when we moved to Albuquerque, and I finished from third grade through high school, and my folks lived there the rest of their lives. And I have one of my sisters. I'm the youngest of four kids. One of my sisters, finally, the last of the Stevenson family, moved away from Albuquerque about 5 years ago.
Aha. So, Gene, as you were growing up, did you have a hero?
I had lots of cartoon type heroes like Superman and Zorro, and when I was a youngster, it was still okay to play with cap guns and Roy Rogers. I actually shook Roy Rogers and Dale Evans' hands at a rodeo in Albuquerque. So that was pretty close to being a big deal.
I think so.
Yeah.
So what did you envision? What did you want to be when you grew up?
I really didn't have much, I didn't think about college at all. And I was thinking about things like being I saw men working on telephone poles, this is when they started, any lineman, for like the Glenn Campbell song, lineman for the county. So I thought about being an electrical lineman. I thought that was fun to climb up poles. I like to climb. So that would seem to be an occupation. You could climb poles and get paid to do it, to put electrical stuff together.
Cool.
So, has nothing to do with geology.
No, nothing at all, and nothing to do with rivers. So what drew you to this area and the rivers that you ran for so long?
Well, as you said, I started Fort Lewis College in 1966 as on a football scholarship, as it turned out, to play at Fort Lewis College, and I really didn't have any specific major in mind, so I just took a variety of the core courses to get through classes, and I had a nice C grade point average. And finally, a friend of mine had taken a geology class and said, boy, it's a lot of fun. You go on field trips and all this stuff. And so I took a geology class. It really sparked my interest. A new professor came in to the geology department at that time, who ended up becoming my mentor and friend for life. And I've co-authored a number of papers with Don Bars was his name. And Don had been doing river trips with Kenny Ross. And so one of our early field trips that I went on was a field trip, a week over the weekend field trip from Durango over here to Bluff. And we went down the river, and I dearly loved it. And I was just enthralled with all the stories that Kenny Ross was telling at the time. And so from there on, I always think about whether it was geology that got me into river running, or was it river running that maintained my interest in geology. And they really do meld together, because it's a wonderful way to look at the rocks that have been exposed to the canyons that are carved by the rivers. And so I went from working on the San Juan, doing some more trips with Kenny Ross, and then certainly at Northern Arizona. My master's thesis was in Grand Canyon. I did a lot of work in Grand Canyon, and after moving away for a short period of time, came back to the Four Corners, and have worked both geology and river running into being my melded career, I guess, as you look back at it.
The rivers and geology, they paired well.
They did pair well. Yes, ma'am.
So I've read your book and I love it. And it's just packed full of amazing information, not only about people, particularly Kenny, but about geology. And you have maps and you have pictures. Tell us a little bit about your experience as you were pulling all this together to put it in one place.
Well, it was quite the challenge. Kenny Ross, as I say, he was Don Barr's mentor for getting into river running, and then so it was kind of a handed off mentorship to me through Don Barr's, and so the Kenny died in 1990. And I was doing river trips here on the San Juan with Doug Ross, his younger son. And I asked Doug if he should put some information together from Kenny. Kenny had all this information. I knew he did. And write about his dad, to get him into the River Runners Hall of Fame along with some of these other people. And the years went by. And so finally I said, I just grabbed the procrastinators that Don and Doug were, and I said, can I do it? And they said, sure. So here came the boxes of files and photographs, plus my own collection at that point. By 1990, I mean, my goodness, that was 30 years or 25 years of experience. And so that's how it all ended up here in this office. And for the first year and a half, it was compiling all of these documents and these letters. And like I said, Kenny was a prolific communicator with everyone It wasn't by phone. It wasn't any computers back in the 40s and 50s and 60s, of course. And so he wrote back and forth with clients, with students, with people that would be coming, people of interest, interested in running rivers and everything. And putting all that together, along with my own geological knowledge, and try to meld the two together into a combinations, actually this is semi-autobiographical for me, as well as a biography of Kenny.
Kenny. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what was your biggest inspiration during the time? Obviously, Kenny Ross was, but was there another underlying inspiration that kept you? It was an arduous task.
Well, just I love this country, and I love to share it with people. When I was doing river trips for Wild Rivers or other outfits, to many people come out west, as you know, on vacations, and they're from the bigger cities or from the east or west coast or wherever, or from international groups. And the Southwest is still just people are just awestruck when they get here. They're amazed at this country. And so what the draw to a large degree is our cultural history, Mesa Verde, and the archaeology and the history of the area. But when they get here, they look at all this magnificent geology. They look at Mesa Verde cliffs right there at Memphis, and they go, my goodness, how did that happen? Why is what caused the La Plata Mountains to rise as high as they are? And how do we get mountains and canyons and rivers and all of this stuff? And so it was really fun to share that and to enlighten people to some basic fundamental earth science concepts. And so that's been really a driver for me over the years to continue to share that information.
Certainly understandable. Yeah. Yeah.
And well, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Let me have a sip of coffee here. Kenny had a number of well-known people that went down the river, and two of the people that were young boys when he had his, he was part of, before he had his river company, he was a manager for it was called the Explorers Camp. It was kind of an early version of what a Knowles type camp, where these adventure camps that kids go to now that learn some outdoor activities, anything from horseback riding, how to climb a rope ladder, and in this case to also include boating. And two people that I talked quite a bit about through the book is John Lindbergh, who was the oldest living son of Charles A. Lindbergh. And of course, everyone should know, probably knows, that the first child was kidnapped and killed. And John, when that happened, Mrs. Lindbergh was pregnant with John. So John was the first child after the original. And John was out here as a young boy at 16, and he met another fellow named Bill Dickinson, and Big Bill. John was a medium built man, ended up being a medium built man. Bill was a big guy. I'm a big guy. And Bill was kind of a lost kid from a divorce situation and all of that sort of thing. And he came out here, and Kenny took those kids under his wing, and Kenny became kind of a surrogate father to a lot of these boys that were in some ways just kind of pushed away by their parents through the summertime. Well, John and Bill Dickinson became lifelong buddies. They both ended up going to Stanford University together. John Lindbergh became more interested in biology and joined the Navy during the Korean War period. And Bill became interested in geology and was in the Army. And that's when after their military period, they both kind of went their own ways. But Bill Dickinson continued to work the Colorado Plateau area as a professor. He went on and got his PhD at Stanford, and he was a professor at Stanford, became a very well-known geologist in a geological world. If I had to name the top 5 geologists of the 20th century, Bill Dickinson would be one of the top. William R. Dickinson. Well, Bill was, when I had met Bill in 1980 at a geological conference, and we had talked about the San Juan River, but I had no idea that he had been a youth under Kenny's wing until I started digging into this. And I called Bill, and at that point, Bill had moved from Stanford to Tucson and was a emeritus status at the University of Arizona. And I got a hold of Bill, and I said, and by that time we had talked a number of times, pure geology and San Juan River stuff. And I said I was going to write a book about Kenny Ross, and he said, "Oh my God, thank God somebody's going to do this." Within 24 hours, literally 24 to 36 hours, Bill was knocking at my door here. He had driven up. He was 83 years old. He had boxes of his information from the San Juan River and from his childhood. And we sat here for 2 days and talked about all kinds of stuff about Kenny. And he was just so tickled that I was going to write this book. And be sure to get back with him, and he'd help me all the way. And so we emailed a little bit. And he moved on from that day. That was in I think it was in April of 2015. So I just really started compiling all this information. And Bill said, "Well, I've got to go off to, I'm going up to Moab, and then I'm driving over to Stanford. They're going to give me another medal of some sort." You know, he was kind of, and here's this man that, you know, in your profession, you know, is like one of the fathers of modern geology of the Western United States. And he was just the nicest guy in the world, a real plain guy, not a snooty type professor at all. And so he went to Stanford. I have a photograph with him standing with 2 of his friends that were his, that he had mentored, and they were now professors at Stanford. And then he went from there to the Tonga Islands, of what this volcano just gone off here last month. And that's where he had been working for the prior 25 years, working with these Polynesian islands, with the different clay mineralogy to tie it into their earth and pottery, so that they could figure out the trade-ware that went from one area to the other based on the details of those clays from the different mountains that make up all the islands. And he proceeded to die in his sleep with a big, massive heart attack in like June that year of 2015. So the book is dedicated to Bill. At the beginning, I say, "I finally got it done, Bill," and that's the truth. He's truly a late stage mentor of mine, but also became a very good friend over the years. And then he was, to give you an idea of what Kenny meant to Bill Dickinson, his oldest son's name is Ross.
Some pretty strong ties. Yeah.
Kind of gives it away right there.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
Bill came back and forth over the years. John was a different story, John Lindbergh, because of the fame of his family and his father. They made such a big deal about John in Life magazine and all these things, and I go through that to some degree in the book. But John just rejected being chased down by the paparazzi, basically, and avoided publicity. And the last I know of John Lindbergh is that he has a salmon farm up in the Northwest Territories, up in Vancouver area. So, and whether he's alive today or not, I don't know. But those two people are from the 1945 forward. You'll see this interaction of John and Bill. And one part that was particularly important in the book to get documented was that there were, in river running, there's various big rapids, Grand Canyon's loaded with them, and there's all these first runs of various different boats and types of boats, solo trips and that sort of thing. Well, there's another stretch of the river, the Colorado, through above Glen Canyon. You launch from Moab, and you go down past the confluence of the Green and Colorado River, and you get to a stretch called Cataract Canyon. And it's the middle of nowhere, even today. And these giant Grand Canyon sized rapids, class 10 rapids, are waiting for you there. And in 1949, there had been a few people go through it. It was, but nobody had been through in an inflatable boat. And it really documented the number of rapids. And Kenny, along with his boys, had done a hiking trip in July of 1949 and had stood at a rapid called Gypsum Rapid. And here came this guy named Griffith that was doing a solo trip. And I have a picture in the book of John Lindbergh that actually jumped on the boat with him as he ran through this rapid called Dark Canyon Rapid, which is a giant, big rapid. And so Kenny had been wanting to do Cataract Canyon trips for 5 years at that point. He had had these boats, and but it was too treacherous to take a group of kids down. So Kenny, at the end of the explorers camp, he and Bill Dickinson and John Lindbergh, those boys were 17 years old, and Kenny was in his 40s, barely 40, in one boat, a little 12-foot inflatable boat, launched from Moab and went down Cataract Canyon, documenting the rapids and their count on the number of rapids, which varies depending on the water level and everything else. But it was the first documented inflatable boat trip through Cataract Canyon that really documented the rapids. And that trip was done with just these 3 people. No phones, no communication. If they'd had any trouble, they would have been really in a terrible place. The Cataract Canyon over the years had a nickname. It was called the graveyard of the Colorado. People would launch on cataract trips and you'd never hear of them again. Whether they drowned or they lost their boat and they tried to hike out. It's really rugged country in either direction, and you get away from water, and there is no other water source other than the river itself. So it's still very, very to this day, when you do a Cataract Canyon trip, it's in some ways, it's a lot more remote than Grand Canyon because there's so much air traffic, sightseeing traffic, and everything else over Grand Canyon. Cataract Canyon is still very much a middle of nowhere stretch out there, as is southeastern Utah in general.
So this was a pretty intense and auspicious task, this wonderful book that, by the way, keeps flying off of our shelf at the library.
Oh, good.
I wanted to know what's next for Eugene. Any
Well,
plans?
Yeah, I've been in one of the Doug Ross passed away January 9th. He had a stroke back in 2018. He had moved out. He had two daughters. He married and divorced, and but he had two daughters. One lived in Seattle, one lived in Portland. And Doug went out to live on the coast of Oregon, at Nehalem, Oregon, which is straight west of Portland. And he had a stroke, and it was one of the classic, totally left side debilitated. And he never really completely recovered from that. Then he got cancer. And finally, the combination, he succumbed to that here just last month in January. So right now, I've got an email I'm staring at here from that we're planning to have a memorial here in Bluff on the San Juan River for Doug later this year, and we can get a lot of the river folks. And Doug and Kenny, you recall in the book in 1961, Elliott Porter's first trip to look at Glen Canyon. And the book he ended up with was the Canyon No One Knew by Elliott Porter before the Glen Canyon Dam was finished and Glen Canyon was flooded and all these beautiful side canyons were underwater. Elliott Porter was a famous photographer at that point, an understudy of Ansel Adams, and had mastered color book photography. And so Elliott Porter and his son came out here, and Elliott was with Kenny in one boat, and Doug with Stephen Porter in the other boat, and that was the first trip. They launched from Bluff, and of course, before the dam, you could go through the confluence of the San Juan and into Glen Canyon. As soon as they got to their takeout point, Elliott knew that he needed to do another trip immediately. So within a month, they came back, and this time he brought some friends, and it was kind of a family trip. Well, one of the friends was George O'Keeffe, and that was all documented in the book as well. And that trip also had a famous photographer named Webb, who took all the photographs of Georgia and Elliott that's sprinkled through the book here too. So there's photographs of Georgia that even the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum didn't have. It's in my book. So there's a number of side stories. Well, that particular trip, the Georgia O'Keeffe trip, is documented from Mr. Webb's diary, and there's a special photograph there where she didn't bring her art easel or any paints the first trip, and she just had to draw some things, and so she took his notebook, this little field notebook, and there was a picture of her sketching in his notebook. And then she ended up also using a grocery sack, a paper sack, and using charcoal from the campfire, and did one of her large floral pictures and canyon pictures, and probably more than one. But one of those, charcoal paintings or etchings, whatever you call it in the art world, is in her studio in Santa Fe. And it's from that 1961 trip.
What wonderful stories. What wonderful stories. I know we have a lot of river people in our patron database here in Mancos, and I'm urging them all to take this book and savor it as the season is approaching.
I think this book actually, if you want to learn about the Mancos area, about the greater Montezuma County, about the Four Corners, and specifically about the San Juan River and how river boating came about from being individual adventure seekers to being a business that Kenny started in 1957 here in Bluff. He was still they maintain their house in Mancos. They're on Grand Avenue to his death, and his wife Mildred died a few years later, 5 years later, and that house, and you know the house and I know the house, is still there, and that was the Ross house all through the years when these boys were growing up, and they knew the Wetherells, they knew just about every name you can think of historically in the Montezuma Valley, Mancos Valley area, yeah. And as well as many of the archaeologists of the area because of Kenny's time at Mesa Verde with Jesse Nussbaum, and then I was fortunate enough throughout the 80s and 90s when I was doing river trips with Kenny here on the San Juan River, and then the fellow that bought the company from Kenny was Charlie Delorme. We did a lot of trips with Crow Canyon archaeology out of Cortez, and those are archaeologists that are very well known to the Southwest. Bob and Florence Lister, who lived in Mancos. Yes. And visited with them a number of times, and both of those people were on trips here. Bob died on a hike with us there's a number of ruins out here on Cedar Mesa, and now part of this Bears Ears National Monument, and it's one called Moon House, and it's a fairly steep scramble to get out to the top. When we got to the top, and Bob sat down and had just a big heart attack and died right there. And Lawrence said, well, he died doing exactly what he liked doing, and what a better place to do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Gene, this has been absolutely delightful. Thank you not only for the book, but for sharing little bits of it with us today. And sure. I know that you're going to be coming through Mancos probably in the summer. Stop in and see us at the library.
I will. We come down there quite a bit. And I wanted to, this is how this book gets passed around. Last year we were, my wife and I were camping up in the Transfer Park, and the camp host was a guy named Dan Vandenberg, and Dan came down to the library to I think because you have your internet, a lot of people camping, with us included, to check emails and that sort of thing. And for whatever reason, he came in the library and he struck up a conversation with you, and he mentioned my book because at that point he had, we'd talked enough up at the camp, and I had given him a book, and so then you'd get interested in the book. So that's how.
That's how it works.
That's how it works.
That's how it works. Well, Gene, thank you for being with us today, and I look forward to seeing you this summer.
Me too.